You are listening to Waffle, the bite-sized podcast with Paul Jenkins. First broadcast on Rossendale Radio on the 21st of February 2021. This week, Paul talks to Keith Miles and Jackie Lees about their shared passion for the music of Bob Dylan and how it resulted in them co-writing a brand new book, Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales.
Playing more of the songs you like. This is 104.7 Rossendale Radio.
So that was David Bowie with Song for Bob Dylan. And let me just read you these lyrics. Hear this, Robert Zimmerman. I wrote a song for you about a strange young man called Dylan with a voice like sand and glue. Now that, a voice like sand and glue, you'd kind of think that would turn you off of things, but no. Actually, there are two people who are joining me this afternoon on the show who are not very much not turned away by voices like sand and glue. They very much enjoy that voice, and my goodness, are passionate enough to write a book about it. Good afternoon, Keith Miles and Jackie Lees. How are you doing?
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
There you go. This is a good sign that both of you can be heard, and we're getting thumbs up from the other side of the studio. The Zoom is working correctly this afternoon. So we are to just let the listeners know we're doing this visually. You guys can't see this at home, but we're having a good old chat here. Linking up. Where are we linking up from? Let's start with that. Keith, whereabouts are you this afternoon?
I'm a Londoner, but I've moved as far out of London as Surrey.
Oh, well, there you go.
Dorking in Surrey.
So we're in Dorking, Rossendale with me in the middle of Rawtenstall. And Jackie, whereabouts are you this afternoon?
I'm in London, on the Isle of Dogs, East London.
Well, there you go. I know it well. I'm a Basildon boy by trade, so I'm not that far from the Isle of Dogs. I know that. So how's the A13 looking this afternoon?
Probably not as bad as it usually does.
No, I was going to say, this is probably the saving grace of all of this, as we're calling it.
Exactly, less places to drive to.
Exactly. Now, talking of driving, I mean, it's not so much a driving tour or a walking tour. I don't know how you would describe it, but your book is very much a travelogue, a journey, a musicology. I don't know how you describe your book, but my goodness, it's fascinating. Now, Jackie, do you want to, first of all, just give us a little bit of an idea of how you came to wanting to write about Bob Dylan, and then Keith, I'm going to ask you the same in a second. What was it that drew you to want to write about the great man?
Well, you might know that there are an awful lot of books about Bob Dylan already. 1,000 is probably a conservative estimate.
My goodness.
So it was going to take something quite important, quite massive, to make me want to add to that collection. And really what it was the fact that London's importance in Dylan's career hadn't been recognised. It had just been a few pages, a few words, a few lines, really, in other books. So Keith and I both have London in common. We met in 1979 at London University. We didn't know we were each Bob Dylan fans, but we'd been Dylan fans as teenagers. And then in 2016, on the Nobel Prize Award, we found out that we were each fans because of some communication between us. And we went on our own tour around London. And then Keith basically said, well, no one's ever said how important this is, so why don't we write about it? I was roped in. I was going to say, that's quite a time to be between 79 and 2016 to have that kind of like shared love of something, and actually it just comes up in conversation. And Keith, yeah, I mean, we've sort of branched on the kind of tour side of the book, but I mean, what does where did Dylan kind of come into your life? Was it as early as when you were at university, or before then?
No, much earlier. I was technically and physically at the Isle of Wight festival, or at the Isle of Wight anyway when the festival was on.
Wasn't it that if you can claim you were there, you probably weren't there? Isn't that the case with the Isle of Wight?
Absolutely. I was a small child though, so a small child with my auntie coming out of London. All I remember is thinking, "Cripes, these are some strange looking people." And had no idea, but through that sort of early time, I always loved music, and as a teenager, the poster on my wall was a Bob Dylan poster of "Don't Look Back," and it was a huge amount of my life and leisure time was listening to Bob Dylan, and say when I found Jack and I had this secret from each other all the time. We were friends from university and beyond, and I think meeting in 1979 as the tipping point of Dylan going into the Christian era, when you probably didn't own up to being a Bob Dylan fan, meant that we were both music fans, and we went to gigs together at university. We did all this, and lo and behold, behind closed doors, we were both listening to Bob Dylan, and that love comes out. We both love London as a city, and we both love Bob Dylan, and the opportunity to put these together for a very first time was extraordinary, which is why, as Jackie says, I roped her in. We've never written a book before. At the grand old age of 61, I'm now a published author. So it's a wonderful thing for us to be able to do.
And a fine thing it is as well, because I like books that are just a little bit different and give you kind of a slightly different angle. And Jackie, let's come back to this idea of the kind of tour itself, because we're used to bands having tours, but not the fans. The fans don't usually get to, unless you are a roadie or something else, you don't usually get to experience every step of the way. And actually, what your book does is it takes you on that journey, venue by venue. How did that structure come about? When did you decide? Was it the actual sort of on the walk that you were doing between the venues?
Yeah, it was a little bit. It went through a few incarnations, to be honest. At one point, I think we had 24 chapters, because we were going to do every single, stop on the way, really. And then thinking about it as a book, we realised it was going to have to be balanced. There had to be some kind of symmetry in terms of, the chapter should be similar lengths. So it was then a case of honing down. The subtitle of the book is Troubadour Tales. So it was honing down those locations, be they venues or streets or cafes or hotels, that had a story to tell, where there was something, it's a light book. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to tell stories that get people engaged. And then hopefully from that, they want to then explore more of Dylan in the music, which is ultimately what Dylan, there's nothing else that really matters with Dylan except the music.
Well, I've got to say that's something that has really helped with me. I'm going to hold my hands up here. I'm certainly not anti-Bob Dylan, but I would say that I am the layman with regards to the kind of inner workings of it. I can pick out half a dozen Bob Dylan songs, but there are Bob Dylan fans such as yourselves. And actually, from talking to you and preparing for this interview, I've really started to go that little bit deeper, and I think some of that kind of enthusiasm we got is a little bit infectious. So I tell you what, we'll do this in relay. I'll let Keith go for this first one. We've got Tomorrow Is a Long Time. Now we've got a recording from 1963 in New York. We're out of London at this particular point. But why this song between you? Because you've sort of worked out the playlist for us this afternoon. Why Tomorrow Is a Long Time? Why is this a really key track?
Well, this is a really key track for me, and I think for a lot of Bob Dylan fans in this country of that kind of generation. We've got wonderful stories of the 60s in the book, but I was a small child, Jackie and I weren't around for a lot of those, and that's the joy of that. But for a lot of fans in this country, the key moment was bizarrely a greatest hits album, which was a double album. And it was called More Greatest Hits, and it had some greatest hits that people all explored, but essentially it had some tracks that had never been played before. And this live version of Tomorrow Is a Long Time was on there. And that it was a wonderful... that sparked, when that came out in the early 70s, a lot of people exploring Dylan, including Mark Bolan, who's pictured with a copy of that album.
Oh, wow. Now, there you go. So there's a T-Rex connection already. There we go. We're talking about influences before we even get going. Right, for the listeners at home, this is Tomorrow Is a Long Time.
Look for @Rossendale Radio on Twitter. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. This is Rossendale Radio.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to 104.7 Rossendale Radio. It's 18 minutes past 5, and we are here on the line with Keith Miles and Jackie Leese, authors of Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales. And we've just been talking, while Bob Dylan's been, serenading us on Tomorrow Is a Long Time, we've been talking about sort of not so much his influences, but people he's influenced over the years as well. Do you think it is that actually Bob Dylan is one of those artists that has... I'll ask you this, Keith, first of all. One of those artists that really you can see him weaving his way into just popular music in general, and other artists really picking up the baton. You were talking about Mark Bolan in particular.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's an individual artist who's been more important. You know, when you look at artists over here, you know, we talk in the book about the 66 tour and the rock and roll sort of stuff. You know, he kind of invented a whole heap of that. And you can see that, you know, at that sort of time, the Rolling Stones are in suits and short haircuts. You know, it's very immediate. You know, and Dylan always seems to lead a path, and people follow him, and then he's off on another path, and then he's gone, and he leaves everyone behind. And you know, that awful phrase "ahead of the curve" or whatever it is, you know, I mean, Dylan is always ahead of that. And you know, those sorts of artists you mentioned, Mark Bolan, I mean, he changed his name to Bolan to abbreviate Bob Dylan. I mean, it was as obvious as that, you know.
I was going to say, if you're literally changing your name to kind of, you know, go with your heroes, I think they can fair to say they're having some influence on you. And we were having a bit of laugh about because earlier on in the day we were talking about worst songs by great artists, and we talked about David Bowie and the Laughing Gnome, the people of Rossendale talked about. But actually, you know, Bob Dylan, for some people have had, you know, I dared to mention to you that the Christmas album is possibly not one of his finest moments, but the shouting down I got off air, ladies and gentlemen, and the shaking of heads on Zoom. I mean, Jackie, you were quite passionate about this.
I love Must Be Santa. I always play it every Christmas. I really like it. But there are whole Dylan albums that I don't listen to. You know, there's the disco Dylan kind of era. And I'm just not drawn to it. There are fans. I remember once posting somewhere to say that a certain album, the one with Every Grain of Sand on it, I can't remember which one it is, but it wasn't one of his best. And immediately, which one, Keith?
Shot of Love.
Shot of Love, that's right. And then immediately all these fans of Shot of Love come back, and it's like, oh, it's fantastic.
It's a great album. It's a wonderful album.
I personally, you know... So yeah, you can argue the toss with Dylan all you like, but what you can't argue is that he has influenced the entire course of music, of popular music, since the early 1960s. He has led the way, and I think there was a famous Beatles headline, "Dylan leads the way," in the 60s, because I mean, he was influenced by the Beatles. It's not to say everything was a one-way street. But his style of writing, the material, the type of thing that he wrote about, the way he sang, you know, he didn't have this, well, as David Bowie said, you know, voice like sand and glue. He didn't have this perfect voice, but he brought something so real that now people are more likely to try and sing like Bob Dylan than to sing like, say, Elvis Presley.
It is really interesting, actually, that, like you say, those influences is coming out. And in the book, you talk about, you've obviously got particular moments from your own sort of personal history with Dylan and experience him over the course of the years and experiencing the music. But are there particular moments, you think, in the story of Dylan, and particularly in relation to the book and the way he was travelling around London? Are there little key moments that you can pick out and you think, you know what, that's where the change started to happen? And I mean, let's relate this maybe to some of those other big icon artists. We talk about Madonna changing constantly to stay with the curve, or Prince being ahead of the curve and changing music. All of those big iconic artists. Are there moments that you've picked out in the book, maybe one each from Keith and then Jackie, of moments where you think actually that's a really important moment in Dylan's career that we've picked out?
Well, I think we covered the most obvious change, really, which is that acoustic to electric change. And, Dylan then is on a path that, as I said before, he creates the rock and roll icon template, really, from that time of Don't Look Back. And we talked through all that, as you know from the book, the first music video is Subterranean Homesick Blues, and he's creating that template. And he's created that template from the Savoy Hotel in London. So, it's so wonderfully connected to London at that time.
It's quite funny actually, because when I was reading it, it's almost like you want a selection of blue plaques around all the places.
Yeah.
And we think we've got in Manchester, not very far away from here, that the blue plaque outside the Midland Hotel. This is where Rolls met Royce, for example. but in this case, it's this is where Subterranean Homesick Blues happen. That's what you want. You want those moments of coming out, and we'll come back to that track in just a moment. Jackie,
but what you haven't got up there is a blue plaque for the Judas call at where the Manchester Free Trade Hall was, because I went to find it and there's no sign.
Well, there you go. There's a campaign starting right here. We're very good on regional cultural identity up here. We'll get it sorted. Right. Jackie, let's come to you with the same question. Is there a moment for you? I mean, we talked about that kind of acoustic to electric shift, but there's something for you in the book that you kind of think, this is a moment for me I wanted to capture?
Well, I think that very first visit, 21 years old, arrives in London in the depths of this incredibly cold winter, comes over. He's doing quite well in New York as a folk singer, and then he meets people in London, and he goes around soaking up all the influences around in the pubs and the folk clubs at the time. We also tell a story of him meeting Robert Graves, the writer, famous for writing I, Claudius and many other important books. And we posit the theory in the book, really, that meeting influenced Dylan hugely and turned him from someone who was doing well on the folk scene into somebody who was going to be a proper writer, a poet, if you like, someone whose literary aspirations just increased exponentially and really changed the way that he was going to write in the future. And Martin Carthy, the English folk songer who really took him under his wing and taught him a lot of things, he very much says England was all over Dylan's next couple of albums. So The Times They Are Changing, and even the one after that, Another Side of Bob Dylan. So yeah, that I think that 62, we very much make the argument that 62 appearance, it wasn't a tour, obviously. He was over to make a film for the BBC, but then they found he couldn't act, so it gave him quite a lot of time off, I think, where he could just, as I say, soak up. He was like a sponge. People have described him like that from his earliest time, even, back home in Minnesota. He would steal albums because he just wanted to know everything. His range of his background in terms of musical history, I think it's second to none. If you ever listen to his Theme Time Radio Hour shows where he becomes a DJ, again, you will hear him just dig out the most obscure artists. So yeah, 62, very important year.
We'll have to get him as a guest doing a happy hour here on Rossendale Radio. It'd be great. I'm sure he's up for that. He's fine. He regularly pops down to this part of the world. We're gonna have to. Talking of radio stations, I better play some music, because that's what I'm supposed to do from time to time. Now we're going to go for the next choice now, and I believe it's your turn to choose, Jackie. I think you've gone for Subterranean Homesick Blues, and now why? I mean, this was mentioned just a little bit above. But you've got, I think, 30 seconds to tell me why this is such a key track.
Well, as we said, this was the site of really what became the music video where it was filmed. Dylan wanted to film the track, and they filmed it in a little street down the side of the Savoy Hotel called Savoy Steps. D.A. Pennebaker, it was part of the film, the Fly on the Wall documentary, and it was really iconic and remains to this day just so fresh and exciting. Just a fantastic video for a fantastic song.
Brilliant. This is Subterranean Homesick Blues.
Online, around the world, via the website, and on 104.7 FM. This is Rossendale Radio.
It is indeed Rossendale Radio, and it's the final part of our interview this afternoon with Keith Miles and Jackie Leese, and we're talking about Bob Dylan in London, the Troubadour Tales, and we're going to. I didn't think that this was going to be able to let it go, as you've said while we were listening to that last track. The poet in me is looking at this and going, "Hold on a minute. There's a literary award here that I'd like to be up for one day, if that's all right. I'd like to be up for a Nobel Prize, all right, for literacy and for the beautiful prize for literature, and to be named a poet." And everybody took that gasp of breath. Remind me, was it 2016? Yeah. the year when everything changed and everything was mad, and we all thought, you know what, that's a strange thing indeed. And actually, we thought, you know, Bob Dylan getting a Nobel Prize for Literature. Defend the corner for us before we start, and then I'm going to say why I've actually been converted by your music choices this afternoon. Who wants to weigh in here?
I'll go first.
Right.
I'll go first, and then Jackie can weigh in again. We'll double down, or whatever the term is these days. I mean, I think the most important thing is that you know, the absolute beauty and poetry in the lyrics is obvious, but you do get other artists who have wonderful lyrics, you know, and wonderful literate lyrics. It happens, you know. Dylan really kick-started a lot of this in popular music. You know, he's writing Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall when the Beatles are singing She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. So, you know, it's down to him that we have these people, you know, and everyone's on, you know, following in that path of Dylan. But what Dylan does, which I think is, to me, unique, is that this is never poetry set to music. There's a wonderful phrase that Professor Betsy Bowden in America has put, which is perform literature. So it marries three elements of the poetry, the written word, and you can look at Dylan's words on a page and they're still wonderful, but that isn't the whole story. Then you have the melodies and the music there. And then, as Dylan said, when he accepted his Nobel Prize in his lecture, he said, look, I'm the same as Shakespeare. Shakespeare will be writing for a stage. It was never written to be read on a page. It was for a stage. And he's also the same as Dylan, thinking, you know, Charlie Sexton's a great guitarist for that piece. You know, Shakespeare is also thinking that's a role for such and such a person. It's the same three elements that you've got coming in together.
So this is Dylan just casting Burbage in places rather than, you know, and actually it's the text that speaks for itself. Okay, yeah. I can hear you on this. Jackie, have you got, as we are doubling down? Well, I'm in a wrestling match rather than an interview now.
I don't know a huge amount about what you have to do to get a Nobel Prize for Literature. So what I'm going to say is entirely personal, which is that there's only one poem in my whole life that I can remember, and it's Matilda Told Such Dreadful Lies, It Made One Gasp and Stretch One's Eyes, which I had to learn the whole of. As far as the rest of everything, poetry is beautiful. I'm a great fan of the show on Radio 4, Poetry Please. I can listen to it. But Dylan's words, because they're set to music, because it's that integration of poetry and song and the way he delivers it, he's got the most extraordinary phrasing. It's very difficult to keep up with. For me, therefore, it becomes so memorable. And isn't that a wonderful thing to have done? And I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and she said that when she'd had a breakup with a boyfriend, she just wrote him a very brief letter, and it said something like, you could have done better, but I don't mind. You just kind of wasted my precious time, but don't think twice. It's all right. I mean, that's poetry.
It is.
and it was just delivered. And to me, I don't know if that's enough to get a Nobel Prize. As I say, I'm not comparing Dylan with all the other people that think they should have got it. But I think that Dylan has done far and away enough to deserve that recognition. It doesn't mean he deserves it more than other people. Perhaps loads and loads of people should get it all at the same time. But I think he has done enough to deserve it in terms of the influence that he has had on popular music and that literary element that he has brought, and to make it so memorable. I can recite so many Dylan lines, and I do, you know, just they're comforting, they're wonderful. I don't know if that's a good enough answer.
I'm just going to narrate for the people at home that when you mentioned that other people might be deserving of a Nobel Prize, there was a very vitriolic shaking of the head from Keith. I mean, to be honest, when I heard the news about that, I was a little bit bemused and befuddled, because that was how it was framed in the media as well. But actually, when I stopped and think about it, from my very basic knowledge at the time of Bob Dylan's work, I thought, well, actually, you know, the metaphor and actually the effect of his work. I mean, there's not many songwriters or poets, or anybody who can claim that they were at the forefront of the civil rights movement and actually affecting change in the world based upon the words that they were putting out. And I thought about it at the time. But actually, and this will come to your final song choice, and we won't reveal the song choice just yet, but you've given me your third song choice, and I wasn't aware of it, and I looked at it. And actually, just looking physically at the lines as a poet, the structure and the form of his work, there's that you can see very definitive rhyme scheme. You can see a very definitive pattern in his work, and the way that he's using timbre, and the way that he is using metaphor, and he has all of those things that I teach kids in schools about, how, this is how to, X plus Y equals poem. It's all there, and it's physically on the page in front of me, and I think you've inspired me to look at him in that light now because of this, and so thank you very much. I am very much looking forward to taking your walking tour. I want to get out. Turns out I'm going to be allowed out of my house at some point in the next 6 months. So it's on my list of things to do now. We've all got our post-COVID list of stuff to do. Going and doing your walking tour is definitely part of it. It's up to you. Who wants to take the lead in telling us where on earth we find a copy of your book and tell us the details of, let's do the big sell for the people at home.
The book can be found in all the usual places. Basically, Amazon has it probably a bit cheaper and about quicker than anywhere else, but we would strongly encourage people to check their local bookshops to see if they can get it and keep them going. And it's also as an ebook as well on Amazon.
Yeah, and it's also visually as well. Keith, do you want to just talk us through the maps and the illustrations as well? Because it's a beautiful book to look at.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Jackie and I wanted to do is have a fun, easy to read and beautiful looking book, which, the world of Dylan books don't always achieve those. And we have some wonderful illustrations and a beautiful map that could take people around from a friend of ours, Julia, and Jackie's going to help me with the surname.
Vatronjek.
That one.
I looked in the notes. I'm glad you did that. There's a lot of Z's in there.
Yeah, but they're wonderful, wonderful illustrations, and we wanted something that brings the stories alive. Because the chapters are stories. They're in, what we feel are fascinating stories that Jackie and I wanted to share about what, the link between Dylan and London. And, we think Julie did a beautiful job.
She did indeed, and we've got. I'm getting nods from the other side of the studio to say they're doing this thing with their hands and saying, "Time, Paul. We've got to wrap things up." So that's how we get hold of the book, and please do. We recommend to everybody getting hold of a copy, and this will be available as a podcast next week. We'll give you some details in there about where you can get hold of things. But just to finish off, we've got the final song, "Changing of the Guards." Who wants to? We've had one each. Who wants to take the lead on just introducing this one?
Well, I think there is a slightly lesser known chapter in Dylan's history, which is 1978, which was very important when he came here. And
it's a good year, the year I was born.
Very good year, very good year. But and this is from one of the slightly lesser known Dylan albums that was out in that year. And as you say, it's the most beautiful poetry.
And it does. And when you listed it, when you got in contact earlier, I looked at it immediately and went, blimey, that's 6.5 minutes long. I don't play 6.5 minute long tracks on my show. It's like pop songs. Get them out. And then I listened to it, and I'm breaking my rule entirely for the two of you because this is a beautiful piece of music, and I'm going to play it for everybody at home. Thank you very much, Keith, and to Jackie for spending the time with us this afternoon. Please, everybody, do go and buy Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales, and this is a wonderful song to play us out. This is Changing of the Guards.
104.7 Rossendale Radio.
So there you go. We come to the end of another Waffle, the Bite-Sized podcast. My thanks to Keith and Jackie for joining me on this week's show. It was lovely to connect up via Zoom, which is always lovely because you get to see people while you're talking to them. And really, they have inspired me to go on this Bob Dylan tour. As soon as we get out of lockdown, I'm going to be heading down to London anyway because I need to go and see family and friends. And I think this is going to be a day that I put into my schedule to go and hunt out these things. We've also Jackie sent us the Spotify playlist, which we've put in the show notes for you as well today. So you'll be able to walk around, see the sights, hear the music, and experience everything through the book. It really is a triumph. So thank you very much for listening to Waffle, the Bite-Sized Podcast. We shall be back again next week with another great guest. And all that it remains for me to say is thank you to 104.7 Rossendale Radio for allowing us to broadcast on a Sunday afternoon. And of course to Melanie Kemp for all of her help editing Waffle, the Bite-Sized Podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you next week.